Good morning. I'm Aaron West, and this is my speech on standardized testing. How many of us have stressed out for a big test that our college needs, staying up all night in order to study for a test that takes hours? The ACT and SAT are the biggest standardized tests that most colleges require for admission and scholarships. The ACT is 175 questions in 4 categories, taking up to 215 minutes, plus an additional writing exercise for those who choose to take it, all according to the ACT website. This standardized test, like others, is meant to measure general ability, intelligence, and problem solving in many areas. Many students get overwhelmed by the length of these tests and the immense stress that comes along with a test that determines if you get into your top choice of college. We need to get rid of standardized testing. One of the greatest ways to study for these tests is with paid materials, which the ACT actually has their own brand of study book for. This means that kids who are able to pay for these study guides, made by the same people who made the test, will have a higher chance of doing well simply because of their ability to pay for it. The ACT website lists multiple different study plans, from $99 to even $699. High prices like these make it obvious that families with more money are going to have a higher chance of scoring better on these standardized tests. Now, obviously you don't have to use these specific study materials to do well on the test, and many didn't even know that these study materials existed. But most of the learning comes simply from your schooling, and that's why schools with more funding usually score higher on these standardized tests. An MIT Press Direct by Ho-Sung Sohn found that extended spending on schools enhanced wages, family income, and educational attainment. Importantly, the magnitude of effects for students from low-income families was larger than those from wealthy families. This means that the kids who had more money in their schooling were able to score higher simply because they went to a richer school. The main reason these standardized tests exist is because of something called the No Child Left Behind Act. The No Child Left Behind Act was a law to hold schools accountable for how kids learned, but also penalized them for not seeing any improvements. This law also kickstarted some of the early standardized testing we see today. One of the ways to best check improvement on these schools is to give all of them the same tests every year and compare the results. One controversy of this law was that everyone had to reach the same standard, even those from disadvantaged backgrounds and those in special education programs, making an unfair standard from the start if they all have to reach the same spot. Not only was this hard on the kids, but it was even harder on the teachers. A quote from Sarah E. Holmes says that for teachers, that creates stress to meet requirements on time and to decipher through material and decide what on the test and what will not be on the test, ultimately choosing what's important enough to teach and what is left out. This quote from her paper about standardized testing and the No Child Left Behind Act shows the effects of teaching to the test, where teachers don't teach what they think is worth learning, but instead just focus their teaching on what's going to be on the exam. That way they can score higher for their school. The effectiveness of these standardized tests is arguable. An academic paper from I. Raffi showed that it can be really difficult to accurately determine the intelligence of a student through just one test. Many times it takes being able to just have test-taking abilities. Oftentimes these tests will have an answer really close to the right answer but not quite there, or even one that's the correct answer but it's spelled slightly wrong. It's not about your intelligence, it's about just picking out these very subtle differences and just test-taking ability. It's no longer a measure of intelligence at that point. Catherine A. Koenig came to the conclusion that the correlation between the ACT and the ASVAB, or Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, was 0.77, or 77% correlation. while the correlation between the SAT and several standard IQ tests was only 0.61, or 61% correlation. This shows that even though the standardized tests do correlate with intelligence for the majority, it leaves out a very large group of people, with 39% of the population not falling in line with the IQ to standardized test score correlation. So many people have a really high IQ but just aren't able to take tests, or on the opposite spectrum, many can take tests super well and maybe aren't super great in the real world like the standardized test says they are. Standardized tests are an unfair and stressful way to incorrectly measure somebody's intelligence. Kids who grow up with more money have more access to study materials than the poorer kids do, giving them an unfair advantage. The No Child Left Behind Act has turned most schools into a teach-to-the-test classroom in order to focus on these high scores rather than the learning. Finally, the effectiveness of standardized tests to measure IQ is arguable and proven not to be very accurate in multiple studies. We need to get rid of standardized testing. Thank you.